Eileen's surfaces, I think, are something that I've really enjoyed. They have this amazing velvety quality.
That kind of peaceful solitude is what I relate to most.
I was particularly intrigued by the repetition within certain works. There were a number of iterations of a particular subject.
One of the things that stands out to me is that people say that the sprinklers are so realistic they can almost hear it.
There's that perfect moment of light, sound, movement, and that moment becomes that transcendent moment.
We've just had a lot of people spending a huge amount of time in the space. People are not just zooming through, and I think that's what's interesting.
I think of works of art as making a difference to the way that one sees the world, and I think the exhibition at the Center made a difference to the way that I see my work. And there are a lot of contributing factors to that. The amount of planning that went into it, the fact that Elizabeth Fairman, the curator, came to London so many times and we discussed so many aspects of my work, and that she brought a very fresh vision to it and to the exhibition.
So part of the organization of the exhibition meant that we had to think very carefully about how to tell the story of her work and her career and see how we were going to tell her story in the narrative that's proscribed by our architecture. When I do an exhibition, I do it on paper and I think about it and I dream about it, and it has never occurs to me to do a three-dimensional model. But Eileen had a student who wanted to do a special model box of the exhibition when it was just so easy to pick a little painting off the second bay and stick it in the first bay and think, oh, that actually works. What happened over the course of time was we really sort of switched our narrative. We were starting out thinking chronologically, and in the end, we didn't do it at all. We'd start with garden pictures and we'd end with garden pictures. And in the middle, we would do the enclosed gardens, which would segue nicely from the Garden Museum project, and then the core focusing on portraiture and that interest that she had in oral history. The model box helped us think through that, honestly, which if I was doing it all on flat paper, I don't think we would have made that leap.
I had to interrogate myself about my work in a way I hadn't before, in particular about why I was a figurative artist, why I was a painter when it's not been a very acceptable thing to be in the art world. And the conclusion that I came was that it's an eccentric thing to be, but I think only the people who have remained painters during the period when it was unfashionable, and it's not so much now, had to really, really want to do it. In some ways it was more of a radical thing to do than a conventional thing to do. The planning of the exhibition, and Elizabeth made me very aware of my very well-defined process.
The sketchbooks are the spine of her work, and I think to give visitors the opportunity to see how an artist thinks is always what I'm after.
I hadn't thought about the sketchbooks being so important. I knew they were vital for how I worked. Drawing in my sketchbook initially to find out what interests me, drawing from memory to find out what matters to me, getting everything in the studio, including photographs, working out what the composition will be, doing a number of quite finished studies, and then medium-sized pieces and then larger pieces, so there's a kind of progression. But the sketchbooks slip in and out of all those stages, so in some ways there are quite often quite finished paintings in the sketchbook, and I hadn't really thought about that. I hadn't seen them, in a way, as a work of art in themselves. The designer of the book was involved at very early stages of the thinking about the book and was conceptually very clear and calm and made contributions all the way through.
Elizabeth and Eileen worked together to look through materials, but I was given an access point at different moments to think about how we could put together all these different kinds of material into a single book and have it really express Eileen's practice as an artist.
The installation of the exhibition is the intersection between the curatorship and the actual work itself. Elizabeth Fairman, we spent several years working on the exhibition and the book, has been very thoughtful and meticulous and rigorous, but I witnessed the installation team being equally as thoughtful and creative and thinking about my work. I was so impressed with the way they actually thought and talked about my work as well. So the combination of those two things seemed to me to be quite remarkable.
But one of the things we kept talking about was like how much we really liked being in the space and how much we really liked the sort of mindfulness of this artwork. And all of a sudden we all had the same sort of idea that what was really great about this show was that it was pretty, it was beautiful. And that idea of what beautiful was and how we interpreted that idea of beauty. Louis Kahn is a major presence in everything we do. I think Eileen's artwork is very sympathetic to the building. The fact that Eileen's work is being shown on natural linen, the wool carpets, believe it or not, play an important part in how this art is perceived in this space. It's not competing with Louis Kahn, it's actually complementing Louis Kahn.
This exhibition feels like a work of art to me as well as being about my art, and it's got something to do with the architecture and the building, Louis Kahn's building, to do with the luminosity of the building and the grid of the building and the subtlety of materials and colours within it has made it, for me, the most extraordinary place to see my work.